Welcome to the MBN Solutions Boss and Data podcast. This episode, our topic is the human side of data. Often the focus within the data sector is on an ever-changing landscape of strategies, tools, techniques and technologies. Arguably, though, the most important single element the industry has are the people who work within it. Gifted, resilient, intelligent and so much more. The human side of data are the innovators, the nurturers, the practitioners, storytellers and curators who work in our data teams and who turn up day after day, year after year, and no matter what shiny new piece of kit we are being told is going to change our lives this year. Joining me today to discuss the topic in more detail is a data leader who is extraordinarily passionate about people first when it comes to data, empowering individuals to feel confident, to explore creative solutions and be comfortable with fast failure, and the critical role we as leaders must play in this. Jade has been recognised as one of these leaders, reaching the final stage in the Rising Star Award category at the British Data Awards and winning the Data Radical Award. Jade is a keen mentor, a key contributor to the Women in Tech and Data forums, and a regular panellist who is passionate about communal knowledge and support when it comes to career progression. Welcome to the show, Jade Jones.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, you are very, very welcome. Now, disclaimer first before we go any further. Jade's views and opinions are entirely personal, and she is not here to represent her employer in any way, shape or form. And with that out of the way, it's a very happy International Women's Day to you.
Oh, thank you. And to you as well. What a great day and great time to do this.
It is, absolutely. Jade, you and I have been getting to know each other a little bit better over the last few weeks. But for the benefit of the audience, can you tell us your story? So that where did you come from? What's been your journey? Where are you now? What do you do? The floor is yours.
Yeah, so my story has been interesting, but also quite straightforward in equal parts, although I suppose we always think our own stories are pretty interesting. So I've always loved data. I actually started back in school doing ICT. I went to a girls' school, and actually this was kind of the era where there weren't as many people taking ICT, and computing wasn't actually a thing at that point. But I ended up taking it for A-level, went on to study computer science at King's College London. And at that point, when you get to the end of your degree, I had a choice whether to go into that hardcore coding engineering role or into more of the application of what I've learned about thinking how we safeguard, assure, protect the very lifeblood of every cool AI thing we've ever thought of. And that was data. But in all honesty, I had no idea what I was doing. What aspect of data do I get into? What motivates me? What drives me? So I just kind of fell into consulting, really. What else do you do at the beginning? Thinking about data analytics procedures in audit and how we can use data to improve coverage, scope, and reduce the time taken to complete those audits and reduce human risk. So you can see I was very much interested in the human side of data from really day one. Continued in similar roles within the space across a number of industries until I settled finally outside of audit within data governance, data management, data quality within retail. So I manage a team of 14 truly brilliant practitioners and truly I just love my job, which I never thought I would get to that state, but I'm really happy that I do.
Okay, brilliant. Now, you've mentioned that initial interest. So this, and when you and I were talking, you kind of mentioned to me, and I'm paraphrasing here and correct me if I'm slightly incorrect, but you'd mentioned that you always knew you wanted to be a people person. You knew you wanted to be a nurturer, you wanted to be a grower, you wanted to be the person who facilitates other people's development. How far back in the journey did you realise this? Was this school? Was this university? Was this in your first? When did you think this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really exposing myself here in terms of the story of how I got into this, but it's important. So my interest in kind of the psychology of how we motivate other people actually started in my own personal journey. Like many angsty teenagers, I had a teacher that I absolutely hated at school, and I'm really embarrassed to admit that now. I did everything to fight against him, and that really overtook me. He was actually, ironically, my ICT teacher. Right. I rebelled against that completely. So I was 16 at the time, completely rebelled against him, purposefully tanked everything I worked on just to frustrate him. And all he ever did was try and, motivate me and encourage me. But then one day he gives me a little slip of paper that we called a commendation, merits, awards, those kinds of things you get at school. Just a job well done, really. And then from that day, I was hooked. I was gone. I excelled in every single class, seeking so much more of that recognition, doing extra work. I worked late into the night, revising for my exams all day and on the weekends. I just craved more of that feeling of a job well done, someone recognizing me. So I literally owe my entire career to him, 100%. Like how easy it was to figure out what motivated me and capitalize on that. It just changed everything. But sort of more nowadays, I see the human side of data as like that twofold piece. Like it's a well accepted fact there will always be a human aspect in tech and data. Like no matter what wild and wacky development we come up with next, we will always need that human aspect, that judgment call. But on the flip side, data is always about how we enhance that intuition. We have our guesses, we have our feelings, we have our gut feelings, but data should enhance that. But this really highlights why leadership and people development and thinking about what motivates people is so critical. Like we will only do our best work when we feel empowered, supported, confident. If we treat humans like a number, we will behave like a number. And if we treat them like a resource, they will behave as such. So we need to think about how, if we need humans to do great things, we need to treat our colleagues as great.
You're making me think here of my uncle, who's now long retired and living somewhere off in a foreign land. But I did my postgrad in human resource management, and my uncle was a human resource manager. And I'd asked him initially when I was looking around at postgrads to do, I'd kind of say to him, what is it that you do? You work in human resources, what did you do? And he said, the way that he kind of thought about things was, if you had a machine, say, that cost, let's just say for argument, £500,000, and it sat over in the corner and you never touched it, you never looked at it, you never cleaned it, you never oiled it, you never maintained it, and it fell over and broke, whose fault was that? But you then have people within an organisation that over the period of time that they're with the organisation probably cost about the same amount. So if you don't do exactly the same thing's going to happen. It's about that nurturing, it's about that care, it's about that attention, it's about ensuring that people are treated in the correct manner. And I think it's interesting when we're talking about the technology space where we're surrounded by machines, we're surrounded by systems, but it's the humans that are the glue that join everything together,
Yeah, massively. Yeah.
Philosophical for a minute there. That was a bit weird.
Well,
okay.
It's like I often say, people management's not just for Christmas. It's
No, absolutely. So traveling back in time, you've got this passion. The spark's been lit by the teacher. You now realise that feeling of reward and recognition is something that you crave. You're now in your career. How did you actually begin the process of becoming that teacher? How did you begin your process of mentoring or coaching or nurturing or passing on that amazing feeling to other people? How did you get started?
I honestly did anything and everything I could possibly get my hands on.
Right.
So I was a new starter buddy in my first consulting role where they had a lot of graduates. But I did that from barely 3 weeks into my own career. So I was a new starter buddy when I still had no absolute clue about what I was doing. And then eventually I became sort of queen of the new starter buddy. So I got to assign them. So, oh God, power hungry at that point. I coached wherever I could. So in consulting, you don't have people managers or direct reports like you do in other industries. You kind of just have seniors. I just coached wherever I could. I joined teaching programs. So we used to go to universities and teach them coding, and again, I was only a few years out of university myself. So, I was really trying to step it up quite quickly. And then eventually I actually just took the plunge and became a secondary school teacher. I left consulting and did my PGC and went into secondary school teaching computing. I think that may have been a step too far, if I'm honest. And I really have to shout out all the teachers out there because you have to do that job entirely for the love of it. It's a really hard graft. And I found myself actually losing the passion for helping others because it's almost like they say, don't get paid for your hobby, that kind of thing. It was something that I like to do on top of my regular day job, but it wasn't something that I wanted to make my entire profession. And also I am a practitioner at heart. So I missed getting down and coding and solving problems, improving data quality maturity, all of those kinds of things. But I've always loved a really well-rounded extracurricular career. I love to be involved in initiatives that see contribution in other areas. So not just my kind of narrow view of the organization, but to see how I can help others around the business. It's actually what really gets me out of bed in the morning, outside of all of the other great things about my job.
Do you think, and I suppose a bit of a supplementary here, because we often think about people who are really advanced practitioners in technology space, for example, as being coded in a certain way. You know, a certain personality type is drawn towards a certain type of occupation, and the people who are in data and adjacent tech tend to be. But it looks as if you're a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You've got, are you aware that you're unique? Are there more like you where you are? I mean, how do you feel about that?
It's actually been quite a tough journey for me, that, because when you do get into management roles, people expect you to take your hands off the detail. And I came into it and kind of just said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do both. And so it's actually, you know, I did start to realize over time that maybe that was something that I'm probably going to have to let go of at some point as I become, you know, more senior in my career. My ultimate aspiration is chief data officer. And I doubt that I will probably be on the ground coding at that point, but I will be leading others. And I hope that my experience of being on the ground as a practitioner will support me in that way. It will be a sad day when I have to start moving away from those kinds of things. It's something, again, like I said, I like a really well-rounded career. I like to be involved in lots of different things and exercising different skills. But it's something that I appreciate that at some point I will have to let go of. But I'm glad that up until now, as a manager, I've been able to do both and be able to combine my passions and my skills in both sides of things.
So, Jade, what do you think is wrong with the traditional way that human resources are managed within the data sector?
Yeah, so traditional human resource functions in large organizations, they have a really hard job, but they do tend to take that individuality out of people management, which, as we were talking about before, I take quite importantly to myself. I find it to be something I get to really think about empathy and what motivates individuals. I think that if we add more bureaucracy to people management through very regular performance conversations whereby you have to follow a certain script, things like that, it's not going to squeeze any more potential out of our colleagues or make them feel any more empowered. All those things that I was saying before really motivate people. So to be honest, all it's going to do is annoy both the people manager and their reports.
Yeah, it's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, exactly. Because instead of working collaboratively together to discuss, you know, that motivation, those career aspirations, thinking about influencing skills, their data storytelling, they're just ticking off boxes through really restrictive performance measures and processes. Right. So managing data, despite being a very technical kind of mindset, it does require you to have creativity.
Right.
And we won't be creative if we feel stifled, unsupported, and our basic hygiene factors in our roles are not met. So there's also this idea at the first sign of underperformance that you should be throwing them straight to the human resource lions or sounding some kind of alarm.
Right.
I think if you truly want to be a people leader, you should feel a fierce protection for your team. I just love that concept of fail in private. We should be giving our colleagues the freedom to fail and feel confident to iterate from there and learn. And it will lead to a better outcome when it's no longer the rehearsal. So when it comes to data, and particularly in those areas of data where you're trying to protect integrity, like data management, data governance, although I might be slightly biased.
Yeah.
You need to encourage people to believe in a better future. You need to be able to see that your leaders have a clear direction in mind. They want to have faith that their leaders are guiding them in the right direction. And I think you'd very rarely find a passionate colleague with a manager who shows all the enthusiasm of a wet sock, but also vice versa.
So the question here for you, and I'm thinking here about human resource function, and I'm going to defend the human resource function in some respects here, because I'm thinking in massively large, complex, sometimes international organisations, there has to be a framework there to govern the management of any resource, be it human or otherwise. And I do take your point that maybe if it's adhered to too rigidly, then it could stifle creativity to a point. Mm-hmm. But surely, from the human resource functions perspective, their job is to protect the corporate body overall.
Yeah.
So they've got to try and provide some guidance. Otherwise, they could have maverick behaviour happening. You could have different teams run in such different ways that there wouldn't be it wouldn't be a uniform experience for practitioners. So I never thought I'd see the day where I would be arguing passionately for the human resource function, but I do genuinely believe that I can see both sides of the argument. Do you think that there's a compromise to be made?
Absolutely. And I actually heard a great saying this morning that will sum this up: is freedom within a framework. freedom within a framework, right? So you have these frameworks, there's suggestions, there's something that we can operate within, but within that there should be freedom. And every single human is unique. They're so difficult to script a performance conversation to say this is what we will get out of it. And if the individual is not doing X, Y, and Z, then we should do A, B, C. That is not how people management should work if it's going to be truly differential to that person. And again, when we think back to my story when I was in school, I did not deserve that commendation whatsoever that my teacher gave me. And again, if we think about that corporate equivalent, I probably wouldn't have deserved any sort of reward or benefit or anything like that in that situation. But maybe my teacher had identified that is what motivated me and kind of utilized it in that way. But that's where I think it gets a little bit too rigid in some of our corporate organizations at the moment, because we can't use our intuition, the relationships we've built with our direct reports, to utilize what will motivate them.
Okay, so here now, where we sit at the 8th of March 2024, why do you believe that this is such an important subject to discuss?
Wow, the more we rely on data to make decisions, which of course we're doing more and more every single day, almost to a scary level, to transform our businesses, to drive our cars so we can sit in the back and eat McDonald's, the more absolutely critical it is that we have the right people with the right skills driving this forward. Right. So one lesson I learned over time, actually, and kind of relates to this human resource aspect we were just talking about, is every single person wants to do well. You will not find a single individual in a role that wants to do a bad job. They might be doing a bad job, but do they actually want to do a bad job? No. But there is complete individual difference, as we said, about what motivates them to do that good job. And it's up to us as people leaders, as I said, to cultivate that and diversify our approach appropriately. How you do that again varies from person to person. But the most important skill in a good people leader is empathy. It's the number one skill, actually, in my book, and the ability to build relationships that have the foundation of trust and values that are important to both parties. And actually, that's where we were talking about that human resource management aspect. Yes, I'm completely understood it's there to protect the organization, but does that mean that there is maybe a compromise on trust between yourself and your direct report due to those kind of frameworks? Building superficial relationships with kind of those fake platitudes like, oh, how are you? How's your weekend? If you don't truly believe in them, it's very clearly felt by both parties. And I think we've probably all been in those situations where somebody's asked you how you are when you know they actually don't want to know the answer. But it will limit the motivation and throughput of your direct report if they believe that you have that kind of very superficial light relationship and you see them as a resource, a number, and nothing more. But one of my favorite terms, which I use all the time, and I like to think that I do embody it, is umbrella management. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so crucial. It's the idea that our role is to protect those we lead when it starts to rain. So they've made a mistake, they've failed in some way, or something's happening in the organization that's creating maybe some anxiety. But then you let the sun shine on them when it stops. So such as they've, delivered something in an efficient way, or they've gained an award, they get the credit for that. So I might be a metadata and data quality manager at the moment, but really I'm just that conduit that allows my team to deliver more. That's how I see my role in that respect. And I am the umbrella in that situation. I think there are two aspects to that kind of human side of data. It is us as people leaders, but also thinking about data not being its own asset without humans involved in it. And I think that will always be the case. That's my other side of things.
Right. Okay. And I'm thinking here about that point that you made at the very beginning about the increasing complexity of the tools and technologies that we're surrounded by. And I'm not just thinking about the dedicated data technology function, but I'm thinking here about, and I think it's every single one of these shows that we do, we have to talk about AI at some point, but I'm thinking here about...
It's going to be mentioned.
RPA, AI, whatever you want to call things that work in the background to make tasks easier to carry out. Happening throughout an organization, we're becoming more technologically savvy as businesses and as business leaders. I think the danger for me is that we lose the humanity.
Yeah.
And I think it's crucially important that, people like you have put your flag down and said, no, I'm making a stand. I'm a super techie, I'm a super geek. I've got this background of a practitioner in technology, but I can see this and I know we need to fight the good fight.
Yeah, fight the good fight is absolutely what I was thinking there. And often we do need to start checking ourselves a little bit more. Now we are in this situation where the speed of progress is just crazy. We're moving forward at such a speed, but we aren't going to ever remove that entirely human element. But there are people out there that feel that we should. And that's where some, other parties like ourselves probably need to, like you say, take a stand. But I do think that it might be a bit controversial to say people are actually the most important part of pipelines, AI, any data activity really, but I will stand by it. I mean, there's that famous example of, I think it's called Abraham Wald, the diagram of the plane with all the whole shot into it. And if they just relied on the data, they would have reinforced different parts of the plane than actually would have actually saved it, because Abraham's kind of stood up and said, well, actually, we need to add some context to this outcome from this data analysis. And that is really what we need to start thinking about, is that we shouldn't be losing our professional pragmatism in that way. We need to start actually challenging the data as well as relying on it.
And I've had this conversation with a few people, and I can definitely see a theme emerging here, which says something like the human element, the human side of data is becoming increasingly important, because if a certain percentage of the role can be automated, it then means that the bit that the automation has freed up is creativity, it's passion, it's emotion, it's the bits that the machine will never be able to do. Therefore, reinforcing the idea that these are the most crucial elements of the role anyway, because it was somebody that was talking about no-code solutions and how you can now spin up something that could at least be an MVP, and it doesn't have any code in it. And if it works okay, then you give it to people who can build code. But now you've got folks like me who are messing around with drag and drop and buttons and things. But the crucial bit's not the bit that the machine's automating. The crucial bit is that I want this to look like this, and I want that bit to go there, and I think this, and I want to feel this when I use it. It's the bits that machine can't replace.
Yeah, definitely. They're useful, but we need to be careful, right?
Back on track. And we've talked about a lot of the good stuff, but let's talk about some of the not so good stuff. What barriers and obstacles have you personally overcame in your journey in the human side of data? What's been tough?
Yeah, the early parts of my career were actually really confusing for me. And I really struggled to find a niche that suited my personality, as well as to find the right culture that really drove me. I think I'm quite a friendly and approachable person, but I like to have a different type of culture. That kind of strict culture doesn't really work for me. Right. I'm really an all or nothing person. And so when I feel disengaged and unmotivated, I will not perform. Going back again to that story with my teacher, but when I am engaged and motivated, you won't find a harder worker. I do work very hard in that respect. So I found it really hard to thrive where I didn't feel motivated or empowered or actually even encouraged to be myself authentically. Working in consulting probably wasn't the start that I should have had, to be honest, with my career for the first few years. There is a certain expectation on you, and it's a really high pressure environment being in consulting. I do love pressure. I have a lot of pressure at the moment, but that fixed behavioral approach and being a little fish in an absolutely huge pond, that just didn't work well for me, because you didn't get that kind of recognition, that motivation, that real one-to-one kind of feeling and coaching with anyone, because you didn't have a direct line manager. So it was really compounded by not feeling like I had the right mentor who could take what made me unique, what motivated me, what empowered me, what support I needed, and combine that together to really get my potential out there. I did along the way have people, managers and leaders who took the time to authentically understand me in every role that I had. And I always did my absolute best work with those colleagues, and that is really what has got me to this point. Then, like many other women in this space, particularly 10 or so years ago when I started my career, it was pretty much the norm to be one of the only women in the team, often in the room. It was quite difficult. But actually the kind of positive about that was what it did do is build really strong relationships with other women in that situation. I've had the pleasure of being part of and leading so many sort of women in tech lean-in circles where you meet women from around the business that you wouldn't otherwise have met, because you are one of the only ones in the team, which are just some of the most positive and supportive groups that you can experience. And I truly encourage anyone to be part of this. But what that did teach me, being the only woman in the room or the team, is I had to hold my own. I had to be strong, and that gave me so much confidence. So I do take from that, to be honest. But Yeah, I think outside of that people management aspect, we know that embedding data into like the culture of an organization is about influencing mindsets and attitude and habits. And if you don't have that data driven culture, you're basically running up an uphill battle. Battling bad data culture is actually something I think pretty much everyone has experienced in some form or another. And I think in that situation, it's all about looking after your little kingdom. How do you make small positive changes in your little area without trying to take on the world? And I found that actually the most sort of difficult situation to deal with out of all of that was an actively negative data culture. And I have experienced that in a few places where they are really resistant to change. And that was what was really important to kind of strengthen those empathy skills, understanding why people are resistant to change and why proactive change agility scares them. And that's kind of what I did in my last couple of roles and why I've ended up here.
Okay, and in your experience over the course of the last few years, have you came across anything in terms of toolkits, solutions, models that you could recommend to other people who are maybe on the same? What's out there that can help people on the journey that you have been on and other people might be coming on?
Yeah, so it might be something for me that I think about in terms of the best approach to these kinds of things, because I think models and frameworks can be one thing. They don't fit every organization. So to me, community-led approches is really what helps me through those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Data people are famous for wanting to talk all day about data.
Yeah.
I find all of the data events I go to, whether it's a conference, a roundtable, a practitioner's circle, I feel like I've just been part of like a group therapy of some sorts. Yeah. And I always leave with so many ideas, not just from that practical perspective, but in terms of like transformation programs, a cultural point of view. They are so valuable. So I find that to be much more what works for me in terms of that relationship building with others in similar situations than anything that might work from a framework perspective. But I think it's so important as well to encourage our teams to get out there to events, build relationships with like-minded individuals, build your village. I think from a growth perspective, it boosts their confidence and being able to get that sounding board in other organizations where you can speak to other people. It's amazing, but I really need to shout out all of those who drive forward programs like Women in Data, Black in Data. I think those initiatives are just fundamental to the community. They really help with overcoming some of those barriers.
To your point about 10 years ago, and I think back to looking back at 10 years ago in the industry and the amount of different organisations of that nature that are now about is incredible. Yeah. And it's such a boom. I can see now why, and to your point about your preferred method of support is to work in these kind of forums. Well, it must have been so tough X amount of years ago where these things didn't exist. Therefore, you've got people maybe like yourself who are maybe keen to collaborate with like-minded peers or keen to maybe be exposed to new ideas and different ideas, but there just weren't the frameworks to be able to do that. And obviously there's been online forums and, subreddits and whatnot forever. But I mean, that whole in the flesh meeting with, talking to me just seems that it's great how the industry has evolved now to make that such an obvious and I noticed the other day it was women in technology and it was women in data, and I was like, wow. And I remember before there was that, it wasn't always there. It's great. And we've kind of drifted into this slightly, but I think we should frame this properly in a question. And we've spoken about role models and heroes, and a massive shout out to the amazing Rachel Keane, who brought both of us together. But it's time. Who else would you like to highlight? So both individuals and organisations that you're looking at out there and you're thinking, yeah, they're doing it good.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can categorically state for the record that I would absolutely not be in this role, in this industry, or even here on this podcast without some of those fantastic role models that I've had the pleasure to try and even attempt to imitate. You already mentioned Rachel. She's doing so much brilliant work in the early career space. I'm so glad to be working with her, to be honest. My absolute idol has to be the superstar that is Roisin McCarthy, who many will know as the founder of Women in Data, whose flagship event actually took place yesterday. I had the pleasure of being there, still on a complete high from the energy in that room. She's amazing. I had the fortunate pleasure of being on a panel with Roisin, and despite being the most intense feeling of imposter syndrome I have ever experienced, I learned more being on the panel than I have ever experienced being at a panel. So it was honestly amazing. I mentioned before, I've actually had mentors pretty much all of my working life. I've sort of sought them out and begged them to kind of give me career advice all the time, which I would recommend to anyone who is looking for a little extra guidance in their career. It's really important, mentorship. And I think you could talk for another whole half an hour about how mentorship is important for both parties, actually, I think. But the two I really want to call out is Helen Hunter. She is absolutely incredible, and I've had the pleasure of having conversations with her, which will stay with me for the rest of the time. And my personal current mentor at the moment, Kelly Diamond, she's absolutely brilliant, and I have to shout them out. They are just wonderful, taking time out of their diaries to speak to me. It's great. I suppose I've also got to mention my original role models and heroes. Sounds like an Oscar thanking speech.
Yeah.
I must do it. My parents always pushed me to kind of pursue whatever mad idea I came up with, and to be myself, authentically myself in any organisation. Maybe cause some hiccups in some occasions, but I think that at least I was always myself. And my mum went back to work kind of after she had me, and my dad stayed at home, and that was probably a little bit different early in the 90s. So they kind of broke that mould straight away, and now, it's a lot more accepted now, it's a lot more encouraged now. And I think them breaking that kind of mold is something that I continue to try and do as much as possible in my career.
Okay, amazing. I'm looking at the time here. We're sitting on 35 minutes. We're almost at the end. We've got the final two questions, and the final two questions always take the same form. And the first one asking you to look forward a little bit, and the last question will ask you to look back. I think just looking at that future, and if I can ask you to future gaze just for a moment, we've spoken about it. We've come a long way in the last 10 years. But what progress in the human side of data do you see happening in the next 10 years?
I've got to mention AI. So, of course. So, I, like everyone in data, have our ears pricked, and the goosebumps created by AI, machine learning, the power these will harness across all our processes. You'd be silly if you didn't feel like that. But despite these being amazing, I think that we will see that actually the human aspect starts being much more of a central focus, or at least I hope so, the psychology of data. So what is...
Oh, I like it, yeah.
I know, Mark. So what's most poignant to me, and actually quite scary in fact, is that data isn't neutral. We will need to understand better concepts like cognitive bias, our lack as humans of statistical intuition, and how we account and correct for these. So there's also been some interesting cases whereby, for example, it was discovered that products released, I think it was an AI product, released by a tech giant, identified they were less likely to recognize female voices than males. So preempting this kind of thing will be really important for our culture and approach for development in the future. And then thinking about this as well, it's really necessary to develop critical minds around our data and what influence is being reflected. We spoke earlier about this professional pragmatism. There was a post on LinkedIn recently, I think, that said data literacy could be the most in-demand skill by, I think it was as early as 2030. Not coding a crazy language or doing, developing AI models. It was quite simply data literacy, the ability to talk about and understand data. And from that, upskilling talent, especially those with non-technical backgrounds, will be a major task for employers and something we really need to think about going forward.
I completely agree. And back to that point there earlier on about the no-code product, I can see a time, and in my career doing this kind of thing, it's been 20-odd years, and I can see a time where the people that are being brought into the industry may not come from that classic comp sci or STEM background. They might come from a completely different background because they don't need that background, because the thing you needed that background for, you now get out of a black box. But what they are going to need is a background maybe in something like a creative discipline or in a philosophical discipline, because what they're going to need to do is the bit that the machine can't do, back to that point about emotional intelligence and creativity and communication and all those human traits. But I can see it happening. I can see a data industry where the graduate intake comes from a completely different academic faculty.
Yeah, and it would be great for the industry, that diversity as well. We just got to know how to harness it.
Yeah. Final question. We always conclude each episode with a trip in the Wayback Machine. And if you could talk to Jade from 10 years ago, based on what you now know about the human side of data, what would you say to yourself?
It's probably going to be a lot of cliches. So I think when you find work that you love doing and that you truly believe in, your career will be a breeze. I really like thinking about the difference between a job and a career. So my advice would be understand and own the power of your internal narrative. So what we tell ourselves internally is true. We all have that little voice inside our heads, and it's usually very, very self-deprecating, or at least mine is.
Yeah, no, mine is too.
Yeah. And actually, there's some really interesting psychology around your brain can't distinguish between whether this is real or it's just thought. So whatever you think about yourself, your brain truly feels about itself. And so if you are so self-deprecating internally, you will continue to feel and kind of compound that, which is really so hard. So be kind to yourself. Taking risks. I think if you want to win big, you've got to play big, and you need to stray outside of your comfort zone in order to grow. You need to learn to face that professional fear factor and get comfortable feeling uncomfortable. But also don't go into the danger zone. I think that when you get too uncomfortable, you just don't learn. You are paralyzed. But actually taking risks. I mean, 10 years ago, I would not think I would be talking here today on a podcast with you about this. So you've got to take risks and play big. Relationships are what will get you through the furthest is actually something I've learned probably only in the last 5 years. No man or woman is an island, as the saying goes, and building your network, as I said, that cathartic group therapy, talking to like-minded individuals, helping each other along the way will get you the furthest. And remembering that anyone you work with could eventually be your boss also helps. I think that's really key. I think people forget that sometimes. I think lastly and ironically, based on what I've been saying through this chat about people management, is actually your career is your responsibility. Your managers, your leaders, they cannot and absolutely should not care more about your career than you do. And neither will your organization. You've got to be selfish, be driven, but ultimately remember that your career shouldn't be your life.
Wow. Wise words, mate. That was a hell of a note to end things on. Thank you so much for that. Jade, thank you so much again for taking the time to speak to me this afternoon. Thanks for sharing your passion, your knowledge and your expertise on the human side of data. And I hope you, dear listener, have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. And if you have, please take a moment to review the show on your podcast or video platform of choice, giving us 5 stars, obviously, and share this episode with anyone that you feel would benefit from a view or a listen. Thanks. Please do look out for the other episodes of the podcast series where I'm joined by other special guests discussing topics that are relevant to today's bosses in data. Visit www.mbnsolutions.com for resources like our UK data salary survey, to watch recordings of our latest data meetup events, or to download white papers, research and thought leadership. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter for the latest news, views, opinions and, of course, hottest opportunities in the data space. Goodbye.
Bye.